In ancient times, there was a prince who, driven by an ambition for the throne, imprisoned his own biological father until the latter's death. Holding supreme power in his hands, his days became a continuous blur of lavish banquets, music, dance, and drunken stupors. He imagined that such peak glory would fill the desolate void within him, but the laws of heaven have never tolerated that which goes against nature. As the days passed, the young king's body began to fester, emitting a stench so foul that not a single concubine or courtier dared to approach. Lying solitary on a vast bed, even the finest silks and satins could not hide his bleeding wounds and the rotting of his mortal flesh. Amidst flesh-tearing pain and soul-crushing remorse, it was only then that the once mighty and powerful king awakened from his long delusion. With his dying breath, scorched by his own sins, he ordered his attendants to carry him on a litter to the monastery to prostrate himself at the feet of the enlightened one, seeking a belated repentance. This was the tragedy of King Ajatashatru, a heart-wrenching testament to the fire of desire and the agonizing awakening at the final hour. Thousands of years have passed. The context has changed, but human hearts still wander within that same realm of delusion. There is an ironic paradox that repeats itself throughout this hurried human existence. When raising a sparkling glass of wine at a luxurious banquet amidst mutual praise and adulation, how many remember their ancestors or think of a divine being? At those moments, the heart is brimming with pride, believing it can manipulate heaven and earth and turn the tides of fate with money and fame. Yet, when glory fades and footsteps falter toward the dead end of life, everything suddenly flips from black to white. Lying solitary on a stark white hospital bed, listening to the dry rhythm of a heart monitor, or when signing divorce papers and witnessing a broken home, or even standing coldly in the dock awaiting a prison sentence, the first phrase uttered is, "Namo Amitabha Buddha." Seeking the Buddha in times of peril is essentially a weak human instinct when the lifebuoy of materialism has completely deflated. The enlightened one, who sat silently under the Bodhi tree of old, does not need a few sticks of fragrant incense that drift away in the wind. Nor is he so narrow-minded as to disparage the belated pleas of shattered souls. The Dharma is compassionate. All beings are born with Buddha nature, yet it is obscured by the thick dust of desire and ignorance. Taoist masters from ancient times have often reminded us that all things operate according to nature. There is prosperity and then decline, union and then separation. When things reach the peak of excess, they must inevitably turn back. At the height of fame, intoxicated by life's nectar, people often forget their roots and neglect the nurturing of their inner selves. Only when faced with extreme emptiness, amidst bitterness and torment, do they frantically search for a fragile, invisible support. This forgetfulness is much like the ancient tale of a wealthy man who, before breathing his last, pleaded with his 4 wives to follow him to the afterlife. The first wife, beautiful and glamorous, whom he cared for day and night, pampering her with fine food and clothes, symbolized the physical body, and she flatly refused. The second wife, capable and industrious, representing wealth, gold, and power, also shook her head, saying she could only see him off to the grave before she would belong to someone else. The third wife represented family, relatives, and close relationships. Though grieving, she could only stand by helplessly in tears. Only the fourth wife, frail and gaunt, the one he had been indifferent to, cold toward, and neglected his whole life, softly nodded and followed him. That fourth wife is karma. She is the spiritual life, the deep soul that had been starved and locked in the chest during the years of chasing illusions. At the banquet table, people compete to serve the body, protect assets, and polish relationships. Yet they heartlessly forget their own souls. They exhaust themselves in exchange for the hollow applause of the world outside. By the time they close their eyes for the last time, the only thing they take with them is a fragile, scarred spiritual part, riddled with wounds that were never healed. The cry for help to the Buddhas during sickness and calamity is, in reality, the gut-wrenching cry of the fourth wife, who has been imprisoned for too long in the darkness of ignorance, now struggling to find a way out. The suffering spread across this world is not, in fact, a punishment from any higher power. Looking deep into its essence, the heart-rending pain on a sickbed or at the edge of an abyss is actually a great teacher, strict but truthful. Buddhism calls this the truth of suffering, or dukkha, a miraculous truth that helps humans awaken. Without painful falls to crush the arrogant ego, how could one understand the impermanence of all phenomena? Amidst a noisy banquet, a myriad of sounds flood the ears, drowning out the echoing call from within. Only when everything collapses, surrounded by the haunting silence of solitude, is the barrier between reality and illusion torn to shreds. At that moment, the cry clinging to a merciful being is not superstition, but the second birth cry of a soul yearning to return to its pure origins. Even for one who has committed heinous sins, an awakening, no matter how late, always carries the meaning of soul redemption. The wheel of samsara and karma does not tolerate evil deeds, but the light of compassion always leaves room for those who turn back. Ancient history records the story of Devadatta, a cousin of the Enlightened One, whose reason was clouded by immense jealousy. Throughout his life, he used every low trick and foul scheme to seize power, harm the wise, and divide the Sangha. He dived deep into hatred and wild ambition, wanting to replace the world-honored one. But in the final moment, when his evil karma bore fruit, the earth split open to swallow his body, and the crimson fires of hell surrounded him, burning to the marrow. In that moment near death, his mouth suddenly uttered the words, "Namo Buddha," a gut-wrenching cry, casting off all hatred and pride, stripping away the armor of the powerful ego, seeking refuge in the harbor of enlightenment before sinking into infinite darkness. That cry is no different from the helpless sigh of those standing in the dock today. When power drops away, fame vanishes, and wealth cannot buy peace, the ego suddenly shatters, realizing how small and fragile one is before the surging current of karma. No one is born wanting to be evil. No one begins a marriage thinking of separation. And no one pours a celebratory glass of wine thinking of the day their body becomes a wreck. It is all due to a lack of mindfulness, the absence of a quiet step back to see the cause and effect behind momentary pleasures. Looking back at the precarious drift of human life, it is like a fragile leaf blowing in a storm of 1,000 changes. We are preoccupied with chasing the brilliant bubbles shimmering in the sun, only to panic when darkness falls, realizing our hands are still empty. The compassionate, enlightened one still sits there, watching sentient beings struggle in the sea of delusion with a silent, infinitely tolerant gaze. He does not need the grand feasts of the world, does not care for the dense incense smoke obscuring human figures, nor does he resent the indifference of people when they are reveling. What he waits for is not groveling pleas, but a blinding awakening from the depths of a weary heart. No one forbids enjoying worldly pleasures, nor does anyone criticize the celebratory toasts during a happy gathering. Life is naturally a tapestry of light and dark shades, but please, do not wait until the body is broken and the soul is exhausted to frantically find the way back. Do not turn sacred prayers into cheap lifebuoys, used once in a storm and then discarded when the waves are calm. Cultivating the inner self is not about fleeing to the deep forest to escape the world, but learning how to keep the mind still in the midst of a noisy, boisterous feast. It is when raising a glass, still knowing where this drop of liquid comes from, and silently thanking heaven and earth for nourishing this form. It is when healthy and powerful, still remembering the serene smile of the enlightened one, to know when to stop before the brilliant but cruel temptations of vanity. True, deep healing never comes from begging for a miracle from above to erase calamity. Calamity is the inevitable result of seeds sown in many past seasons, bearing fruit according to the laws of nature. Healing is when lying in pain on a sickbed, yet still smiling to accept the fracturing of the physical body, knowing it is time to return what was borrowed to the dust of the earth. It is when witnessing a family break apart, yet still being able to calmly walk through the puddle of resentment, understanding the law of conditioned union and separation, gently letting go to find freedom and serenity for the soul. Suffering is not scary, The denial of suffering and blindness are the shackles that bind humans to an infinite cycle. This life is short, like morning dew on a blade of grass, vanishing into the void in the blink of an eye. Grand feasts will end, and glorious powers will rot with time. Ultimately, the baggage carried to the next realm is only the lightness of a soul that has learned how to let go, or the 1,000-pound weight of karmic fruits, heavy with resentment. Peace does not lie in avoiding storms, but in how we anchor our souls when the tempest arrives. Namo Amitabha Buddha. Let it not just be a phrase blurted out in utter panic when pushed to the edge of the abyss. Please do not turn the names of the Buddhas into a tool for bargaining, trading for peace when one has sown too much hurt for oneself and others. Let those words resonate like a temple bell, gentle in each morning upon waking, calling the pure part of the soul to awaken. Let it become your breath, reminding you to live fully and mindfully in every present moment. Buddha does not reside in a distant sky thousands of miles away. Buddha is in your very own steady, peaceful breath, and in a heart that knows how to return to silence amidst this world full of drifting impermanence. Smiling at a glass of wine as it fills and empties, understanding all rise and fall, that is the most profound way to give thanks for the life that exists.